The Swami's estimate of historic Christianity. Some of the deepest convictions of our lives are gathered from data which, in their very nature, can influence no one but ourselves. The instantaneous estimate of a motive or a personality, for instance, cannot be communicated in its vividness to any other, yet remains irresistible to the mind that makes it. It may be either true or false, that is to say, it may be based on a subtle species of observation, possible only to a few, or it may be only a vagrant impulse of emotion. But this, as it may, the strong subjective impression will color much of the subsequent thought of him who has experienced it, and will appear to others as wisdom, according to its good or ill luck in coinciding with fact. In the same way, if for the sake of argument we grant the truth of the theory of reincarnation, it immediately becomes conceivable that some minds may enjoy occasional access within themselves to stores of subconscious memory in which others have no share. If so, it is just possible that the results of such an excursus might furnish clues of some value, even though the difference between it and pure imagination could only be appreciated by the exploring mind itself. Some such train of thought is necessary if one is to visualize no less than three striking subjective experiences, which exerted an undoubted influence over my master's mind and thought. Chief of these probably was that vision of an old man on the banks of the Indus, chanting Vedic psalms of sorts, from which he had learnt in his peculiar method of intoning Sanskrit, a method much closer to that of Gregorian plain song than is the ordinary singing of the Vedas. In this he always believed himself to have recovered the musical cadences of the Aryan ancestors. He found something remarkably sympathetic to this mode in the poetry of Shankaracharya, and this fact he expressed by saying that the master must have had a vision like this in which he had caught the rhythm of the Vedas. Another similar experience had come to him when he was quite young. It was in the days of his discipleship at Dakshineswar under Ramakrishna. He was seated at home in the little room that formed his study, meditating, when suddenly there appeared before him a man tall and largely built, in whose face was a calm so deep and so established that it seemed to the lad, looking up at him, as if both pain and pleasure had been forgotten during infinite time. The devotee rose from his seat and prostrated himself before his visitor. Then he stood still, lost in an awestruck gaze. Suddenly it seemed as if the form before him were about to speak. But at this, a fit of terror overcame the boy, and without waiting to hear, he slipped quietly out of the room and closed the door behind him. This was a vision to which he had referred when he spoke of the entrance of Buddha into his room in his youth. As he said, "And I fell at his feet, for I knew it was the Lord himself." Nor would it be easy to measure how much of the throbbing energy of his feeling about Buddha, the conviction of his overwhelming sanity, the realization of his infinite sacrifice and compassion, was born of that hour in his boyhood when he had felt that he stood revealed before him. Later, one of the Swamis, Saradananda, told me that this vision occurred 2 years after Sri Ramakrishna had passed away, probably around January 1888. The third and last of these determining visions, in so far at least as known to those about him, occurred to the Swami on his way home to India in January of 1897. One gathers that during his travels in Catholic Europe he had been startled, like others before him, to find the identity of Christianity with Hinduism in 1,000 points of familiar details. The Blessed Sacrament appeared to him to be only an elaboration of the Vedic prasadam. The priestly tonsure reminded him of the shaven head of the Indian monk. And when he came across a picture of Justinian receiving the law from two shaven monks, he felt that he had found the origin of the tonsure. He could not but remember that even before Buddhism, India had had monks and nuns, and that Europe had taken her orders from the Thebat. Hindu ritual had its lights and incense and music. Even the sign of the cross, as he saw it practiced, reminded him of the touching of different parts of the body in certain kinds of meditation. And the culmination of this series of observation was reached when he entered some cathedral and found it furnished with an insufficient number of chairs and no pews. Then, at last, he was really at home. Henceforth, he could not believe that Christianity was foreign. Another train of thought that may have prepared him unconsciously for the dream I am about to recount lay in the fact that he had, in America, had a Jewish disciple by whom he had been introduced into Orthodox Jewish society and led to the more or less careful study of the Talmud. Thus he had a clearer sense of the background of thought against which St. Paul stood forth than is at all common. Still, an added factor in his study of Christianity that is worth remembering was his familiarity in America with the movement known as Christian Science. In examining the birth of religions, he said once afterwards that there were three elements of which he thought we must always take account: doctrine, ritual, and the nature of magic or miracle, which most commonly appeared as a movement of healing. The grounds for his inclusion of the last member of this triad I find partly in his observation of Christian Science and the allied movements, coupled as this would be with his own conviction that we are now on the eve of a great new synthesis in religion, and partly in his vision itself, which was stamped so vividly on his brain fiber as to stand in his memory amongst actual living experiences. His dream. It was night, and the ship on which he had embarked at Naples was still on her way to Port Said when he had this dream. An old and bearded man appeared before him, saying, "Observe well this place that I show to you. You are now in the island of Crete. This is the land in which Christianity began." In support of this origin of Christianity, the speaker gave two words, one of which was therapeuta, and showed both to be derived directly from Sanskrit roots. The Swami frequently spoke of this dream years later and always gave the two etymologies, but the other seems nevertheless to be lost beyond recovery. The therapeuta, the meaning advanced was sons of the Theras, from Thera, an elder amongst the Buddhist monks, and the putra, the Sanskrit word for son. "The proofs are all here," added the old man, pointing to the ground. "Dig and you will find." The Swami woke, feeling that he had no common dream, and tumbled out on deck to take air. As he did so, he met a ship's officer turning in from his watch, and he asked him, "What is the time?" "Midnight," was the answer. "And where are we?" "Just 50 miles off Crete." This unexpected coincidence startled the Swami, lending inevitable emphasis to the dream itself. The experience now seemed to precipitate elements that without it would have lain in his mind meaningless and unrelated. He confessed afterwards that up to this time it had never occurred to him to doubt the historic personality of Christ, and that after this he could never rely upon it. He understood all at once that it was St. Paul alone of whom we could be sure. He saw the meaning of the fact that the Acts of the Apostles was an older record than the Gospels, and he divined that the teaching of Jesus might have originated from the Rabbi Hillel, while the ancient sect of the Nazarenes might have contributed the name and the person with its beautiful sayings, reverberating out of some unknown antiquity. Or he thought perhaps that the beautiful sayings of Jesus might really have been uttered by Buddha, and the tale told in the Gospels opening thus only another vista for seeing of the One. But while his vision thus exercised an undeniable influence over his mind, he would have thought it insanity to offer it as evidence to any other. The function of such an experience, if admitted at all, was to his thinking subjective alone. He might be led by it to doubt the historic character of Jesus of Nazareth, but he never referred to Crete as the probable birthplace of Christianity. That would be an hypothesis for secular scholarship alone to prove or disprove. The admitted historic spectacle of the meeting of Indian and Egyptian elements at Alexandria was the only geographical factor of which he ever spoke. Nor did this intellectual dubiety in any way dim the brightness of his love for the Son of Mary. To Hindu thinking, it is the perfection of the ideal, as ideal that matters, and not the truth of its setting in space and time. To the Swami, it was only natural, therefore, to refuse out of reverence to give his blessing to a picture of the Sistine Madonna, touching the feet of the divine child, or to say in answer to an inquirer, "Had I lived in Palestine in the days of Jesus of Nazareth, I would have washed his feet, not with my tears, but with my heart's blood." In this, moreover, he had the explicit sanction of Sri Ramakrishna, whom he had consulted anxiously in his boyhood on a similar question to be answered. "Do you not think that they would create such things must themselves have been the ideal that they held up for worship?"